There was a story told by Fariduddin Attar, who was a very great Sufi poet, of there was a company of moths and they decided that they would like to experience what a candle is like. And so they delegated one moth to go and investigate the neighborhood of the candle, and that moth came back again to the company and said, yes, I've seen the candle. It's like a long stick, it's white, and it's quite bright. And the king of the moths said, I don't think you've really found out what the candle is. And then the second moth took off, and he thought it was very fascinating, and it got rather hot next to the candle, so he brushed his wing against the candle. It was a little bit painful, and he came back again and he said, well, there's a lot of heat in that candle, and I went through a terrible risk, and I'm suffering from the pain in my wing. And the chief of the moth said, even you haven't really experienced the candle. And then the third moth went, and he went right into the flame, and his whole body became a flame. And of course he died. But the chief of the moths said, now he has experienced the candle. And this is the mystery of God. To speak about God just doesn't make sense. It's like the one who speaks about the candle that he's never experienced. It doesn't make sense. And that's why a lot of people don't like speaking about God, because it doesn't make sense if you're not speaking about something you have really experienced. And the one who has experienced it isn't there anymore to speak about it. But all of us are experiencing something of it. And we're experiencing it at those times when we find ourselves shattered by that very mystery that we want to look into. It's like letting oneself be cut into pieces and made whole again. It's like those moments, those intense moments when we feel life so strongly pulsing in our being, and we realize how shattering it is to the sense of ourselves as an ego. I know we say that we need an ego to live, but how can you be able to make good use of your ego unless you have first become egoless, unless you have first gone through death, without any hope of survival? And then some compassionate being will bring the pieces of your being together again and make you whole. But you have to go through that complete darkness and be nothing. There's no compromise. It's not like saying, well, I know that the ego has to be overcome in order to be transmuted, and so I'd like to transmute the ego. No, that doesn't work that way. You can't transmute the ego. You have to give it up altogether. You have to go through life, perhaps at one stage in your life like a blind man who cannot see, or let yourself be led like a corpse by one who loves you, into the complete darkness of the unknown. And all the ideas that we have and the theories that we have of it are so completely inadequate and so completely misleading, and I would say even so completely pernicious, that I feel very often, well, you know, one is teaching things, and this very teaching itself it's like a truth that is derived from reality. You know, like an abstraction. What is an abstraction? Like the symbols that we use in mathematics. What are they? There's something, a symbol that stands for something. And you forget what it stands for, and you're just working with a symbol. And that's what learning is. It's like working with the mind on a kind of autopsy of a real experience. And then you ask, well, what did Pir Vilayat teach? Or what do the Sufis teach? Or what do the Hindus teach? Or what do the Buddhists teach? And that isn't where it's at all. Because then the mind comes in and builds a system. If we only knew how very irrelevant and completely illusory our thoughts are. You cannot experience reality. You have to be reality. And what we want to do is try to experience it. That's what we're trying to do in meditation. We're trying to experience instead of being. This may be a clue. This is a clue to something I think that happens to all of us in meditation. When we try to withdraw ourselves from ourselves, right? We want to try and withdraw our real self from our false self, we say, don't we? And then we think that we are experiencing our real self. And that I call the higher self. And then we look down from that higher self upon our other self, right? And we could easily isolate ourselves into that sense of existence beyond time and space and beyond the ego self, and think this is it. This is what we want to experience, and this is what we are. And this kind of meditation will lead to a kind of nirvana, as it is called in Buddhism. And there is a dimension that we miss. And that dimension is to experience ourselves as the thou to whom God speaks, not as the one who is experiencing God. That doesn't make sense. That's the mistake. As the one who experiences, this is the key to Sufism. And when I say Sufism, I don't mean another ism. Maybe I shouldn't say Sufism. Maybe I should say a revelation that comes to the one who is annihilated. And that is to be receptive instead of active. Let's say, as Al-Halaj says, to let the divine operation, the operation of God take place in you. You can't transform yourself, and that's an answer to a question that was asked yesterday, or day before, whether you can, whether you can transmute your qualities. No, you have to die. And then the divine qualities are brought into you completely fresh, as a kind of fresh outpouring. That's the way it happens. And even that is only one stage. There are so many stages that you go through. And at each stage you think, now I've got it now, this is it. And then you come to another stage and it's quite different, and everything you thought was completely, is completely ludicrous. And you don't know what to think anymore. And that's when you're beginning to learn, when you don't know what to think anymore. And when you think, I've got it now, we can make a system now, you see. Can't do it. You've lost the whole thing. You can't experience cosmic joy unless you have become a target, unless your heart has become a target for the thousands of arrows that hit you in all directions, that hit God in all directions. God's heart. You experience in your heart until you feel so distraught with yourself. You know, this is a kind of psychological trip that many of us go through. And we think that it's something that's just happening to us. We're really experiencing what is happening to God. A kind of disenchantment with the self. Which is part of a transformation that is taking place in one. And then there is that moment when there's a breakthrough of some new understanding, and it's always different to anything that I or anybody else could tell you. But it seems like the emergence or the dawning of, let's say, a transcendental dimension beyond yourself, which we call God. Now the stages of these are, well, we could explain it in words, but in so doing, of course, we do take away something of its value. At first, you think that you are the one who sees. And then you experience yourself as the one through whom a divine consciousness sees. So you experience yourself as being the instrument. And you think, well, that is it. Now I've really found out my place in life. I am, you see, I am an instrument. And so long as you still think of I am, you haven't reached it yet, even as an instrument. And how can you reach the next stage? Or how does God bring about the next stage in you, which is a better way of saying it? And that is when you have become so completely dazzled by the truth, by the discovery of meaning, that of course nothing makes sense anymore. And so yourself doesn't make sense. So you can't say I am an instrument, because yourself doesn't make sense. And that is when all of a sudden you come to a point when you are able to say, I am the divine glance that is looking at all things. But when you say I am, then of course there's no limit anymore. It's the I am that I am that spoke to Moses. Now don't say these are the higher stages of realization and how can I reach that stage because I'm a limited person. If only we knew how God suffers whenever we say I am limited. We are limiting God by saying I am limited. This is maybe the greatest suffering that we create in the heart of God. To put it more bluntly, He is tired of our complaining of being so inadequate. But there are moments when you do feel this being, or you feel you are this being. There are those moments. I'm sure that there are those moments when you're walking and in nature, for example, and you're so transported by the sense of meaningfulness, and you realize that your thoughts have absolutely no value at all. And you're just experiencing, but you're not, it's more than experiencing. It just happens like that. You're just in that state where, well, you can't say it's all clear because it doesn't happen in the mind. But there it is, that condition is there, let's say. I don't know how to put it in words because there aren't any words to say it. Anyway, the key to this was, if you remember, the key to it was not to think of yourself as the one who experiences. And now the meditations, you see, what I'm trying to do today is to bring us further than we have been brought so far, because in the meditations that we've been doing so far, I have been trying to show you how to bring yourself into your higher consciousness. And really what we did, what I called the higher consciousness, is not the ultimate by any means. It was simply the consciousness of the image that you are from all eternity. It's a structure, like, the archetype of your personality. Do you know what an archetype is? Like, for example, the eternal model of, let's say, you could have the mold of which you make thousands of copies. Now that's not exactly an archetype, that's a mold. But you could have, let's say, a perfect model and then copies that are more or less good of that model. So the archetype would contain the principles, and then the copies would be limitations of that principle. Or you could, perhaps another example of an archetype would be rosehood and roses. And so you might have all kinds of roses, but rosehood is a reality in itself. Now, can you understand that even your eternal being, well, let's say your eternal being is an archetype as compared with your personality. Can you see that? Like, personality is like the rose as compared with rosehood. And your eternal being is rosehood. And then can you imagine then that your eternal being is derived from the archetype of your eternal being? And that archetype of your eternal being is what we understand by God. So at a certain moment, at a certain level of consciousness, you experience yourself as being the image of God. And then you begin to feel the archetype of which you are the image. And this is what happens when you lose yourself in the contemplation of all the divine attributes, and they're all such a reality to you, and you experience them in your eternal being, and finally you can experience them right down into your personality, but you can experience them in your eternal being. I mean, your eternal being seems to be like a certain structure that has derived from its archetype, which is, let's say, God at a certain stage of descent, at a certain stage of descent. But this is only one level in our experience. It's one level in our experience. And I wanted to bring you to this level because it's very concrete. It helps you to remodel your personality and to work with concreteness, with your problems and so on, your human problems. But maintaining oneself in this context is a limitation, and every next plane shatters the plane that comes before it, going upwards. So the next plane after that is experiencing yourself as the one who sees, you see. When you experience yourself as the one who sees, you're not experiencing yourself in your qualities, or even in your heavenly qualities, even in your eternal qualities. You're simply experiencing subjectivity, let's say. Subjectivity in the sense of the subject who sees, right? The subject. And this is where the next makam lies, the next station of the Sufis, where the sense of being the one who sees has to be disintegrated. You see, and that's very difficult for a lot of people to understand, because they can understand that their character has to be changed and so on. But how can the me that sees, I mean, how can I disintegrate the me that sees? I mean, you think you can lift your consciousness higher up and experience higher. That doesn't work like that. And this, if you read the Sufis, you will find that they tackle this very problem